This is something most people completely ignore, but a single quarter sitting in your pocket right now could be telling a story you've never noticed before, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of these ordinary-looking coins have quietly become a surprise for collectors. In the middle of the 1960s, America was changing faster than ever before. Cities were expanding, television was reshaping culture, and the United States was stepping deeper into a new era of modern economics. But in the pockets of millions of ordinary people, something very small was quietly passing from hand to hand without anyone thinking twice about it. A simple quarter, a coin so common that most people never bothered to look at it closely. Yet hidden inside this ordinary-looking piece of metal is a story that connects war, inflation, government decisions, and one of the most important transitions in American coinage history. If you were to travel back to 1965 and stand in a busy street corner in New York or Chicago, you would hear the sound of vending machines clicking, taxi meters ticking, and cash registers opening and closing all day long. And among all those transactions, the quarter played a silent but powerful role. It was the workhorse of everyday life. But something unusual had just happened inside the U.S. Mint that very year, something that forever changed what this coin would become. For decades before 1965, quarters were made of real silver. They had weight, they had value, and people could feel the difference just by holding them in their hands. But by the early 1960s, the rising price of silver began to create a serious problem for the U.S. government. The metal inside the coins was becoming worth almost as much as the coins themselves. People started hoarding silver coins, pulling them out of circulation and storing them away, believing they would become more valuable than their face value. This created shortages in everyday currency. Vending machines started malfunctioning. Banks struggled to maintain coin supply. The entire system was under pressure. So in 1965, a historic decision was made. The United States Mint removed silver from quarters entirely and introduced a new composition made of copper and nickel. This change might sound simple today, but at the time it was one of the biggest shifts in modern coinage history. And this is where the 1965 quarter becomes much more than just pocket change. When the first batches were struck, the transition was rushed. Millions of coins were needed immediately, and production moved faster than perfect quality control could keep up. That is where the hidden story begins. Because in moments of transition like this, mistakes can happen. And in the world of coin collecting, mistakes are often where the real value is born. At first glance, the 1965 quarter looks almost identical to earlier silver quarters. The same design, the same portrait, the same sense of national identity. On the front, you see the strong profile of George Washington, the first president of the United States, facing left with calm determination. It is a design that has become one of the most recognizable images in American history. On the reverse, an eagle stands with wings spread wide, clutching arrows and an olive branch, symbolizing both war and peace. It is a powerful image, one that reflects the balance of strength and diplomacy that America wanted to represent. But what most people never realize is that in 1965, the soul of the coin had changed completely, even though its appearance had not. Instead of silver, it now carried a copper core layered with a nickel coating. This structure made the coin cheaper to produce and removed the incentive for people to melt it down for metal value. It solved the government's immediate crisis, but it also created something unexpected for future collectors. Because when a system changes quickly, not every coin comes out perfectly. Some 1965 quarters were struck on leftover silver planchets from the previous year. Others may have been struck with slight errors in weight, composition, or alignment. These rare mistakes are what collectors spend years searching for, sometimes going through thousands of coins just to find one unusual example. And this is where the real excitement begins. Most 1965 quarters you will ever see are only worth their face value. But a small number of rare varieties can become highly desirable in the collector market. The difference between an ordinary coin and a valuable one often comes down to details so small that most people would never notice them without training. Weight differences, edge characteristics, metallic tone, and strike quality all become important clues. A normal clad quarter has a very specific ring when dropped. A silver-based error coin sounds completely different. Even the color tone under light can reveal secrets that were never intended to survive for decades. Collectors often describe the search for these coins as a kind of treasure hunt hidden inside everyday change. You could receive one in a grocery store, a gas station, or even as change from a vending machine without ever realizing what you're holding. That is what makes the 1965 quarter so fascinating. It is not rare in the traditional sense. It is rare in the hidden sense. Because somewhere out there, still circulating or sitting in old collections, there may be a mistake coin waiting to be discovered. And while most stories about valuable coins end in disappointment, every once in a while, someone finds something extraordinary. Something that was never meant to survive. Something that turns a 25-cent coin into a life-changing discovery. In the next part, we will go deeper into the exact minting process of the 1965 quarter, the hidden errors that collectors search for, and how to identify whether a coin in your hand is just pocket change or something far more unusual than it appears. In the early 1990s, America looked stable on the surface, but underneath, everyday life was moving fast. Shopping malls were full, ATMs were becoming normal, and cash was slowly turning into something people barely paid attention to. Coins especially were no longer seen as something important. They were just small metal pieces used for parking meters, vending machines, and loose change in the car. And in the middle of all this, in 1991, a very ordinary-looking quarter was produced by the millions. At first glance, it seems completely forgettable. A small copper-nickel coin, bright when new, dull when old, passing through thousands of hands without leaving any impression behind. But like many coins in American history, what looks ordinary on the surface can still carry hidden stories inside it. To understand the 1991 quarter, you have to understand what was happening in U.S. coin production at the time. The economy was in a phase of efficiency and mass production. The United States Mint was striking coins at extremely high volume to keep up with demand. There was no time for artistic perfection or special experimentation. Everything was about speed, consistency, and reliability. That means the 1991 quarter belongs to a category of coins that collectors often call modern workhorses. Coins made not to be rare, but to be everywhere. It features the familiar portrait of George Washington on the front, a design that had already been in circulation for decades. By 1991, this design was so common that most people never really looked at it anymore. It was just the quarter. Nothing special, nothing unique, just part of daily life. On the reverse, the eagle design still carried the same symbolism of strength and peace, but even that had become routine. The artistic meaning was still there, but the emotional attention from the public had faded. People were focused on credit cards, bills, and rising consumer culture. Coins were becoming background noise. But this is exactly where the story becomes interesting. Because when something becomes too common, people stop paying attention to the details. And in the world of coin collecting, details are everything. The 1991 quarter was made using the standard copper-nickel-clad composition that had been in use since the mid-1960s. That means no silver content, no precious metal value, nothing that would normally attract attention. In bulk, these coins were produced in the hundreds of millions across different mints, including Philadelphia and Denver. Most of them entered circulation immediately and disappeared into everyday transactions. They were spent on coffee, bus fares, parking meters, and store purchases. Many are still sitting in jars, drawers, and old piggy banks today. But even in a mass-produced system, perfection is never absolute. During the minting process, coins go through high-speed striking machines. Metal blanks are fed rapidly, stamped under extreme pressure, and ejected into containers. When millions of coins are made at this speed, small mistakes can happen. Sometimes a coin is struck slightly off-center. Sometimes the pressure is uneven. Sometimes a blank is not perfectly prepared. And in rare situations, a coin can show unusual characteristics that were never intended by the mint. These are the moments collectors pay attention to. In a standard 1991 quarter, everything should be uniform. Weight, color, edge pattern, and strike quality should all match expected specifications. But when something deviates even slightly, it becomes a potential variety worth examining. For example, a misaligned strike can cause parts of the design to appear weak or shifted. A die error can create doubling effects where letters or edges look slightly shadowed. Even small differences in metal flow can change how light reflects off the surface. To most people, These differences are invisible, but to experienced collectors, they are signals. The fascinating part is that a coin like the 1991 quarter doesn't need to be rare to be interesting. It only needs to be unusual. Because in the world of numismatics, value is not always about age. It is about scarcity, condition, and error. A 1991 quarter in perfect mint state condition can be worth more than face value, especially if it has been preserved without scratches, wear, or circulation damage. But the real attention comes from error coins. Some rare 1991 quarters have been found with striking anomalies such as off-center designs, die cracks, or unusual mint marks. These are not common, but they do exist. And every time one is discovered, it becomes part of a small but fascinating group of modern collectible coins. There is also another layer to this story that collectors appreciate. The early 1990s were a transitional time in coin collecting itself. Before the internet, discovering valuable coins required physical searching, coin shows, and dealer networks. Information was not instantly available. That meant many people held rare coins without ever realizing their potential significance. Even today, there are likely 1991 quarters sitting unnoticed in old collections, passed down through families, or stored away in forgotten boxes. And that is what keeps interest alive. Because every coin from that era represents both mass production and hidden possibility. Most of them will always remain simple quarters, but a small number carry characteristics that make them stand out under careful inspection. And in collecting, it only takes one discovery to change everything. As time passes, coins like the 1991 quarter also begin to gain historical context. They represent a time before digital payments dominated everyday life. A time when physical currency still moved constantly through society. A time when coins were handled daily by millions of people without thought. Now, they are slowly becoming artifacts of that period. In the next part of this series, we will go deeper into how to identify valuable 1991 quarter varieties, what specific errors collectors search for, and why even modern coins like this can sometimes surprise the entire collecting world when least expected. And as we move forward through these hidden stories of everyday currency, one thing becomes clear. Sometimes the most ordinary coin is only one small detail away from becoming something far more interesting than anyone ever imagined. In the year 1970, the United States was standing at a strange crossroads in history. The country was dealing with social change, economic pressure, and a growing shift toward modern technology. Television had become the main window into the world. Cars were getting faster, cities were expanding, and life was moving into a new decade with a completely different rhythm. But in the middle of all this change, something extremely ordinary was being produced in massive numbers and passing through the hands of millions of Americans every single day. A simple quarter. At first glance, the 1970 quarter looks like nothing special. It does not shine differently. It does not look rare. It does not announce itself as anything important. It is just a small round piece of metal designed to represent 25 cents in everyday transactions. People used it for bus fares, laundry machines, vending machines, parking meters, and small purchases that required exact change. It was part of life, not something people studied or admired. But like many coins from the late 20th century, the true story of the 1970 quarter is not on the surface. It is hidden in the details of how it was made, where it was produced, and what kinds of rare mistakes occasionally slipped through the minting process. By 1970, the United States Mint was fully operating under the copper-nickel-clad system that had replaced silver coins in the mid-1960s. That change had permanently transformed American coinage. No more solid silver quarters circulating in everyday use. Instead, the coins were now made with a layered structure, designed to save metal costs and ensure stability in circulation. The outer layers were copper-nickel, while the core was mostly copper. This structure gave the coin durability, but it also made it far less valuable in terms of metal content. And yet, even in this highly standardized system, something important always remains true in coin production. No system is perfect. The 1970 quarter was struck in large quantities at different mint facilities, mainly Philadelphia and Denver, with proof versions also produced in San Francisco for collectors. Each facility followed strict guidelines, but the reality of high-speed minting is that millions of coins are produced under extreme pressure, and even the smallest variation in machinery can create unexpected results. This is where collectors begin to pay attention. Because while most 1970 quarters are completely normal, a very small number can show unusual characteristics that set them apart from the rest. The front of the coin features George Washington, the first president of the United States. His portrait had already been used for decades by this point, and in 1970, it had become one of the most recognizable images in American currency. It represents stability, tradition, and continuity. On the reverse side, the eagle stands with its wings spread, holding arrows and an olive branch. This design symbolizes both strength and peace, a message that had been carried through American coinage for generations. But even when the design stays the same, the way it is struck can change everything. In some rare cases, 1970 quarters were produced with minting anomalies. These are not common coins, and they are not found in everyday circulation easily, but they do exist and are highly discussed among collectors. One of the most interesting types involves proof errors. The San Francisco Mint produced special proof versions of the 1970 quarter intended for collectors. These coins were struck with extra care, using polished dies and specially prepared blanks. The goal was perfection. However, even in proof production, mistakes can happen. One of the most famous rare varieties is the 1970s proof quarter struck on a foreign planchet, believed in some cases to involve leftover or misfed blanks from other coin systems. When this happens, the coin can show slight differences in weight, color tone, or metal appearance compared to standard quarters. To the average person, it might look slightly odd but not necessarily important. To a trained eye, it becomes something much more interesting, because it means the coin did not follow the normal production path. Another area of interest is strike quality. Some 1970 quarters show doubled features or slight misalignment in design elements. This happens when dies shift slightly during the striking process. The result can be subtle doubling in letters or edges of the design. These are not dramatic errors in most cases, but they are enough to attract attention from collectors who study modern coin varieties. Condition also plays a major role in how these coins are viewed today. A 1970 quarter that has never been circulated, still showing its original mint luster, can be significantly more desirable than a worn example. Preservation matters more and more as time passes, especially for coins that were produced in massive quantities. But even with perfect condition, the true excitement comes from rarity. And rarity in this case does not mean age. It means uniqueness. Because the 1970 quarter exists in the shadow of millions of identical pieces, any deviation becomes important. It is also important to understand the historical moment behind it. In 1970, coin collecting was becoming more popular in the United States. People were starting to look at pocket change differently. Books and guides about coin values were becoming more common, and collectors were beginning to realize that even modern coins could hold surprises. Before this period, most attention was focused on older silver coins. But gradually, the idea began to shift. Collectors started searching through everyday change, hoping to find something unusual hidden in plain sight. The 1970 quarter sits right in the middle of that transformation. It is not ancient. It is not made of precious metal. It is not visually rare. But it represents a system where even mass production can occasionally produce something unexpected. And that is why it still attracts attention today. Because every coin like this carries two identities at the same time. One identity is obvious, a standard 25-cent piece used in everyday life. The other identity is hidden, a potential error, a variation, or a preserved specimen that escaped the normal flow of circulation. Most of these coins will never be anything more than pocket change. They will continue to pass through vending machines, cash registers, and coin jars without notice. But a very small number will always stand apart when examined closely. And in the world of collecting, it only takes one discovery to change how an entire coin series is viewed. In the next part, we can go deeper into specific 1970 quarter varieties, known mint errors, and how collectors examine details like weight, strike patterns, and die characteristics to identify whether a coin is ordinary or something far more unusual than it first appears.